Quad66 update video here on doing some 1S stuff. I have kind of like a bunch of different things here to talk about, and rather than doing one in-depth dive on any one thing, I think I'll go through and talk about a couple different things. The highlight of this is actually, of all the things between the motors and frames and the rest of it, is actually these props. So these are the Avan 3-inch props. And I like these a lot, at least my initial impressions. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more, but a lot of in 1S, I was kind of like hoping that this could possibly work, but it does basically what I thought it would be, what it would do, which is just be a little bit too short on kV to really have the performance we want. So these motors, these are the LDRC 1102 motors. These are basically the equivalent of the 1103s that I've been flying recently on 2S. And these are wound to give you about 12,800 kV, at least that's what they report them as. And I tried to fly them on a bunch of different props. Ultimately, probably the best one, the ones that worked best, these are the Gemfan 65mm S press-ons. But at the end of the day, the kV on these motors is just a little bit too low. You get good efficient flight time, but on the 65mm prop, still probably kind of the biggest limiting factor is really just kind of the thrust to weight ratio when you're doing this kind of build. And you can see that this isn't exactly the lightest build. It's maybe a little bit on the chunky side, but I don't think it's quite close enough to where going super lightweight on this is going to get you really where you need to be. And so when I think about things, when we're not exactly where we want to be, I kind of think about, like, is it just one area that's kind of deficient and we can sort of overlook it or work around it, or are there more than one things? And in this case, with this motor, unfortunately, there's just too many things kind of going against it for, even though it's a nice motor, for me to say, that it's really, I think it's worth my time. In terms of those things, is one of the biggest ones is, well, the KVs, that's the obvious biggest one, but next biggest is basically the way these are put together, which you can see that there's really short wires, and it's also kind of like a chunky motor. It's for 1102. It's a 3.44, 3.45 gram motor, which that's really kind of into 1103 weight range. Versus, so these are some GEP-RC 1102 motors, and I kind of like these before. But these are like a 3.1 gram motor. So when we're thinking about flying these on 65mm props, weight's a big factor, and these are just kind of a little bit too chunky. The other issue is they've got this funny mounting pattern. So that's a 3-hole. It's a M2 screw, but it's on the 9mm. And so ultimately I had to end up actually cutting a frame specifically for it, which is kind of annoying. And then part of it too is we're thinking about weight on 1S with the 3-hole, although I think the 3-hole makes a lot of sense if you got like the small M1.6 screws, but when you bump up to the M2, 2 screws is plenty. So you end up kind of doing this funny mounting where you're just using 2 holes, and rather than being straight across like on the 4-hole mount, you're kind of at this funny little angle, which is less than ideal. I was flying this mainly on the 500 or 5 to 600 mAh batteries, and you get a nice long flight time, but it just doesn't have quite enough punch to where I'm happy with it. The other issue that you can see here is I had to extend out these motor wires. These motor wires, they're super short. Obviously they kind of had these intended for like whoop builds, which to me is a little bit strange because it's sort of like the KV is sort of like in the middle. I guess maybe if you're going real small prop and you do 2S, maybe that makes sense. But for anything where you have enough prop to really kind of use these motors potentially, the wires are too short, so I had to extend it. And so, maybe this quad would actually fly pretty well if you went down to a smaller battery. Like GMB's got the new yellow label 380 cells. And maybe if you drop the weight down enough, then you could overcome sort of the power deficit to where you get back into a nice thrust to weight ratio, and that would be maybe enough to get you there to where this flies really well, because this does actually handle. It's kind of responsive. I like kind of the way it flies. It just doesn't have quite the punch to where it feels satisfying. Also with these props, I kind of went back through and tried some props. These motors do basically spin the tri-blades, the Gemfan 2512 tri-blades. I don't have them right here in front of me. Ultimately, these props were kind of the best in terms of performance, other than the fact that they're sort of hit or miss on the balance, and so oftentimes you get at least one or two props on there that kind of vibrate quite a bit. And so you just end up with like just one too many factors that makes it really worthwhile. So at this point in time, I don't think we have a good 1102 motor. And the 65mm props, we don't really have a good prop really necessarily to match it super well either. So you're kind of stuck a little bit with just too many factors kind of going against you. So it's interesting. Maybe I'll work on it some more, but right now kind of putting this to the side. So went back to this, which the 3-inch 1S 3-inch I've kind of like put aside for a while. And I think that's mainly because of our favorite 3-inch props. So these Gemfan 3018 props. Yeah, those are Gemfan 3018. So these props are kind of interesting because they're pretty efficient and they're fairly lightweight. So for their size, so if you weigh them out, this Gemfan weighs in at 0.85 grams versus this is the Emax prop. This one measures at weighs in at 0.81 grams. So essentially these are the same weight. But surprisingly, they fly quite a bit different. And this prop, actually, this Emax prop, am I saying that right? Not Emax, Emax prop. So the Emax Avan prop, it actually solves about 50% of my complaints. It addresses about 50% of my complaints with the 3-inch 1S builds, to the point where I actually like flying this again. And basically what it addresses is that this prop is nice and responsive down low at 1S speeds. So it feels a ton better to me. I think it gives up some efficiency. I think where the Gemfan, the 3018, where it gets its efficiency is this hub on it. It's super thick. So if we stack these right on top of the other, the hub is super thick and it's just got a lot of angle. It's got a lot of pitch on that prop close to the hub, and it transitions as it goes out to the tip. That pitch isn't carried all the way out to the tip. So a lot of motors can't spin it, but you got this big kind of like scoop near the hub, and I think that might be where, because this prop performs really well in thrust testing. It's got a good amount of thrust for the efficiency. And I wouldn't be surprised if this Avan prop, the Emax Avan prop, I wouldn't be surprised if this one doesn't test as well on the thrust stand. But I've always felt that this prop has kind of like a spooling up effect. To me, it feels like a motor with a turbo, with a big turbo, and there's a turbo lag where down low you kind of have to wait for it, and then it kind of gets going and kicks in. And then once it kicks in, it's pretty impressive. But until it does, to me, it just crushes a lot of the fun out, and it makes the quad fly like these giant puffball marshmallows. This Emax prop, on the other hand, I feel like it addresses that flight feel, where it gives me much better responsiveness down low to where I have fun flying the quad, which at the end of the day on 1S, I can't really say that I find this flying with this prop all that much fun. And this Emax prop does it in a way better than, this is the Nazgul prop, the Avia Nazgul. The Avia Nazgul, I think overall is kind of similarly lower pitch, like the Emax, or the Emax Avan prop. But this is a heavier prop and definitely much more durable. I actually like this one on like 2 to 3S. But on 1S, this one doesn't quite have the kick it needs. And so on 1S, it just feels a little bit lackluster, versus the Emax prop actually feels, it doesn't feel like it's given up a whole lot in terms of like top end punch versus the 3018. I think it does give up a little bit of efficiency. I think I've been noticing some decreased flight time. But in terms of the way this prop flies, I will 100% day after day give up that little bit of efficiency to get a prop that I enjoy flying. This prop does have some unfortunate downsides. It gets chewed up super easy, which I'm willing to tolerate. That's okay. And if you feel kind of the material it's made out of, it just feels a little like, more like rubbery. Just feels less solid. And it's not the weight. You know, the weight's basically the same weight as the Gemfan. And then the other issue too is it's a little bit inconsistent in terms of the way it fits on motor shafts. This one's not too bad, but in a lot of cases I'm using the prop screws versus with the Gemfan prop. A lot of times you don't need the screws. These props seem to have better overall. They stay on the prop shaft a little better without prop screws. Though sometimes you still need the prop screws anyways. But balance-wise, at least I've had 2 packs of these Emax Avan props, and in both cases all the props have been well balanced. So I'm willing to overlook the size of that hole, you know, to put on the prop shaft, because there's so many other factors that I like about this prop. Well, so many, not really that many. It's really, I just love the way they fly, without giving up in too much efficiency and without giving up much in the way of thrust. So with props, if there's ever like one area to go ahead and just try everything, it's props, because the props are relatively so cheap compared to everything else we do that when you're looking at different performance things, you might as well just buy it. Like, don't take my word for it. Just buy all the props. Buy some of the Nazguls. Obviously, buy your 3018s. Buy some of these. Try them back to back and see what you like. It's, you know, the cost. There's not much cost barrier, so you might as well just do that. Do yourself that favor and do that. The last thing to talk about was the motors. So I had previously said basically with these motors, just go buy them because it's basically all that's available. In general, I think that these slightly larger motors is what you want with, you know, the 3-inch blades. And so if the 1103.5 is good, then maybe the 1203 is better. So I went ahead and bought these motors pretty early on the recommendation from James, because he likes them a lot. And most of the time with kind of his observations, I've generally agreed with him and I trust his opinion. They're also really nice looking motors. I like the silver, and they're kind of nice. They just look good. If you compare these motors, these 1203 are bigger. So weight-wise, this power drum motor, 1103.5. So this is a 4.8 gram motor with kind of reasonable motor wires. And the Flywoo motor with reasonable motor wires is a 5 gram motor. So 4.8 or 4.76 in this case versus 5. So 0.25 grams heavier. So in a whole build, you're going to add 1 gram of additional weight. Maybe worth it for you. So this motor, I think this motor to me looks pretty chunky. It looks like it's going to take some abuse pretty well. So if it flies close enough, you might like that. It's not a super notchy motor. You can feel a little bit of notch, but it's not crazy notchy. It's actually pretty similar to the power drone motor. I think the power drone motor is slightly notchier. With the power drone motor, I've mentioned that I've had problems with these prop wire or the motor wires breaking really close. But I've solved that issue just by using an extra piece of tape really up close to where you mount it so that the motor wires aren't tugging around, and since I started doing that, I haven't broken any more motor wires. You can really see the difference here in the size with the 1103 versus the 1203 in terms of the width, where on the Flywoo 1203 it almost looks like the base is smaller, but that's really just an optical illusion because of how much wider this motor is versus that one. And you can see that difference there. In terms of the magnet gaps and stuff like that, this looks reasonably tight. Looks like a reasonable construction. So in terms of how do these fly, James really likes these motors, and so I was super excited about them. The problem I have is I don't have exact twin builds, so I can't do like straight A/B testing. That's really what you need to do, is you need to have 2 quads with the same exact build, so you can go and just fly them back to back and really have one fresh in your mind right when you jump on the other. Unfortunately, I don't have that, so what I did is I went ahead and flew this with the power drone motors with the 1103.5s, and then swapped it out and put these motors on. The props I happen to have on the power drone were the Emax props. So when I swapped these over, I went from Emax props to Emax props and switching over the motor. In terms of the kV, these are reported out a little bit higher. These are reported at 12,000 kV versus the Flywoo are at 11,500 kV. And also with the power drone, you have a little taller stator, which tends to, at the same kind of given kV, you might be able to spin that up a little bit higher RPM versus the slightly wider motor. But anyways, I was, based on James's praise for these motors, I was expecting a lot. And honestly, my initial impression was a little bit of a letdown. Not that they're bad motors, but I was let down that they didn't blow me away. And that might have been because maybe I was just expecting too much. It might have also been because my back-to-back comparison is on this Emax prop, which is easier to handle than the Gemfan 3018. So possibly what's happening here, why we got two different impressions in terms of like being blown away versus not blown away, is I think you might get more of a difference out of the Gemfan 3018 prop, which has, I think, a little bit more pitch and struggles a little bit more with that sort of spool-up effect that the 1203 motor might be able to manage that and handle that a little bit better. And also I suspect that James maybe flies in slightly bigger spaces where the top end punching over trees and stuff like that is a little bit more important. Maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe that's why I was underwhelmed by this motor in terms of relative performance. Overall though, I like the way this motor flies. Like, this is certainly, if you like the style and if you're interested in this motor, I can certainly endorse it. I like it. Just if I'm going to be honest though, and again, this is where I really wish I had quads to fly back to back. I need an A and a B because this is really hard to make this comparison, but my gut reaction was that I think I liked the Pyrodrone maybe a little bit better than the Flywoo. I can't really confirm that though because I really need two quads and flying back to back. I'd also be really interested. I think it's close enough though that where we need to really be able to kind of distinguish some of the differences and split the hairs, I think we need some thrust stand data also. But that kind of comes to the conundrum of, okay, I like this quad enough again, mainly because of the props, that I'm like kind of interested in putting the time into it again, getting it to fly really well, and doing some things of like kind of, I redesigned the Warpick 120 frame and kind of want to test like 2.5 millimeter versus 3 millimeter and kind of get into the details on that. The issue though is I need two quads and I'm stuck with like now all these different 1S boards because like these Nebudrone boards, I don't recommend them because they don't update the firmware frequently enough. So that's kind of like a no-go there for me. This FPV cycle board, Rugi totally changed it. So you can't get another one of these boards. Now there's like a 1 to 2S board, and it's like a SH70, I think. So the dead time is like 70. And one of the nice parts about the 1S boards, the dedicated ones, they got the real short dead time of just 5. Which is what you really want on 1S because you're already dealing with not enough like braking and things like that in the motor. So you don't want that extra dead time. Plus on the Rugi boards, there's nothing built in. So it's like you're building 1S and you've got to solder all these extra wires with the receiver and all the rest of it. So then the question is, okay, what 1S board do you want to deal with? The Happy model, everything's integrated there, but the motor pad, the motor pads to solder to are really tiny, so I don't know if I want to deal with that. Plus, in my experience in the heat, I don't really like having the VTX built in because the board tends to be more prone to overheating. So I'd rather have, I think, the receiver built in. And so now we've got some options. So there's the Beta FPV board, which is a dedicated 1S board, and it's got the Express LRS built in with the little cube. But on that board, it's only 5 amp ESCs, and I am kind of a little bit concerned that if I go ahead and throw these motors on there, am I going to pop those 5 amp ESCs? I'm not sure. And it's kind of like a $40 experiment. I don't know if I want to do that, but otherwise the board looks good, but Beta FPV is kind of known for pretty inconsistent reliability, so that's sort of an issue there. So what other boards are there? There's Flywoo's got a version of, you know, a 1S board. Obviously, I don't have these things in front of me. I wish I did to talk about them, but I don't have them because I haven't bought them. But Flywoo's got one, and so you can get the 1S board, and you can get the VTX built in, and then you solder on the receiver, and maybe that's fine. The nice part about that is that you're not using any kind of, you're not dependent on the board manufacturer to provide you with the Betaflight version, because right now on both the Happy model with the Express LRS built in and also the Beta FPV with the Express LRS built in, on both of those boards they have to give you the Betaflight version because the current releases of Betaflight don't have that capability to do the SPI Express LRS. I think that'll change, but then I'm kind of worried, like, what if it doesn't? And then you're stuck with two boards that you're dependent on the Happy. Do you really want to be dependent on the Happy model and Beta FPV giving you the hex and updating it? And I really like being able to go ahead and flash, you know, the nightlies of Betaflight to be able to get the new features and things like that. So then what do you look at? I mean, do you look at the Flywoo board with the integrated VTX? I don't know. That's again the 5 amp ESCs. Beta FPV, they've got one Express LRS board. It's got the bigger ESCs with 12 amp ESCs. But on that board, instead of using the nice, you know, these nice little ceramic, I don't think they're actually ceramic, I think they're plastic, these little cube antennas, you know, that we have here that we really like, they've got the UFL, and so you hook up your, you know, little mini Mortal T antenna, which I hate those, especially for receivers. The UFLs just, they don't hold up, they bright, you know, I don't know, I don't like it. I really like these little cube antennas. So anyways, that's kind of a nice little ramble there. Overall, I honestly think you can't really go entirely wrong with either of these motors. The Power Drone motor is a little bit lighter. Hopefully they keep stocking it. Hopefully this motor doesn't disappear. On the other hand, that's maybe one of the nice things about this motor with the Flywoo. This is brand new, so I doubt that they're going to discontinue this anytime soon. Flywoo is pretty good about not doing that. It makes me crazy. I really like, I want to do an AB and I can't even buy this board anymore. Also, there's, you know, with the Rugi motors, that's kind of been, it's like this one and done, like really, like, you know, we don't need a new motor every single time. And in fact, like, you know, like we found out with our 2S motor testing, you know, some of the old stuff is better. That, you know, Brother Hobby motor, that's your champ basically out of it, and it's discontinued in favor of all these you know, new motors that really don't perform as well. But so from that regard, in terms of not having to switch motor powertrains every time, there might be an advantage with the Flywoo motor. So a little bit heavier, but I think it still performs well. I think it's going to be, it looks like it's going to be durable, but I'll do sort of a follow-up review after I beat these motors up a little bit, see how good, you know, how well they stay. And maybe I will figure out what to do in terms of getting a couple of boards, you know, twin boards to do some twin 1S builds, because I like flying this again. I'm kind of excited about that. So props, just needed some good props. I think that's all I have right now. So until next time, cheers.